Hi there, Paul Goyer here again from ATG Law Group. And what I'm going to talk about today is the importance and the definitions of KYC, AML, and anti-money laundering requirements that affect our law firm and affect all the transactions that you're going to be involved in. This is a very important area for us that we have to really closely monitor. So first, let's talk about what the definitions are. What is KYC AML? You hear this term thrown around all the time. KYC stands for Know Your Client. AML stands for Anti-Money Laundering. Bear those in mind, but what it really centers around and why those requirements exist, it centers around the concept of money laundering. Well, what is money laundering? Well, money laundering is the process by which an individual conceals the origin of money. The origin of that money is an illegal source, and they make it look like it comes from a legitimate source, or they run it through a business transaction or series of transactions to show that it is a legitimate source ultimately on the back end of that transaction. Now, money laundering is a federal crime and a big one. It'll get you a lot of time in prison. There's two types of money laundering. There's concealment money laundering and promotional money laundering. Concealment money laundering is probably the more common, and that's where the identity of the original funds is concealed. The identity of those original funds is some illegal source. For simplification, I'll call it cartel money. They conceal the source of their money. That's concealment money laundering. Then there's promotional money laundering. Promotional money laundering is where you use proceeds of a legitimate transaction for illegal purposes, and you hide where that money's going. Now, probably most commonly, money laundering involves two things. It involves concealment and promotion that can certainly be combined, all of which is a federal crime and a violation of numerous banking and financial institution regulations. Now let's talk about Know Your Client requirements, KYC. And at ATG Law, we take the KYC AML requirements very seriously. KYC stands for Know Your Client. And all financial institutions and other regulated bodies like our law firm and other transactional institutions have a KYC requirement. It requires that we know as much information as we can get about our clients and the source of incoming monies. So it starts with the basic information, your name and your contact information, your website address, and your email address and so forth. But it also goes way beyond that. We need your dates of birth, social security number, if that applies to you, passport number, copy of your passport, and then in many cases, banking information, all going to the source of the money and the background of the transaction. Now, this is not a one-time requirement either. It requires that we monitor this on a continual basis. And what we try to do at ATG Law is about every 6 months, we'll go back and do a review of all our clients and make sure they are still compliant on the KYC requirement. Next, and more importantly, is the AML requirement. Again, sorry, more acronyms, Anti-Money Laundering, AML. Now, there are two laws that you should be familiar with. There's the Bank Secrecy Act of 1970 and the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2022. That's a recent act. And what those laws require is that financial institutions, primarily banks, but also law firms like ours and other entities involved in regulated activities like transactions, continue on an ongoing basis to monitor, to come up with a comprehensive plan to avoid money laundering. Now, we talked about money laundering, what the definition of that was earlier, but we have to have a plan in place where we avoid that. Now, we deal with the global banking system, and they are under strict AML requirements, where they will look at not only all the KYC information that we talked about a minute ago, but they're going to want to know about the transaction. Does it make sense? Is it logical? If it's a commodities transaction, they're going to want to know what the deal is. Who is the buyer? Who's the seller? What's the purchase price? Is it all logical? Does it make sense? If it's suspicious in any way, that has to be reported to federal authorities, which could be the Treasury Department or even the FBI. And they will investigate these matters, which is something you do not want and something I do not want. Now, the banking institution also, if they suspect there's a money laundering problem, either a KYC or an AML problem, they will stop the transaction. They will hold all monies involved in the transaction until they can properly investigate it. And you can bet you they're going to take their sweet time. They could take weeks or months that could tie up the transaction. So that's why we take the KYC AML requirements very, very seriously. And to tell you the truth, it weeds out some of our clients and customers, quite frankly, because if they cannot provide us that information, we cannot do business with them. And again, the most important part of that, besides all the identifying information of the parties involved, is what is the source of the money involved in the transaction? Who owns that money? Who's the title holder to that money? Is it the actual buyer? Well, many times there's a financier involved or a financial institution that might be lending or investing in the transaction. So we need to know all about them. The days of a secret financier or a secret person or entity behind a transaction are long gone. So don't even think about it. So there's a little overview of what the requirements are for us for KYC AML and to avoid money laundering. It's a very strict requirement. We follow it very, very closely, all for the benefit of our clients and to make sure the transactions go through in a smooth and timely fashion. Let me know if you have any questions on that. Okay, with all of that in mind, and that's a lot, and believe me, there is a ton of law behind this, cases after cases and other subsidiary statutes. If you have any questions in this area, please reach out to us, get in touch with us. We will help you gather this information if it's available and help your transaction go smoothly. Thank you.